Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, host also of RT's talk show Crosstalk. And today, we have the honor and pleasure of having a fellow member of Locals joining us for a free floating conversation about media and tech and the threats to freedom. Alison Morrow. Alison Morrow, who is a former Fox News producer. She worked for a number of years at Fox News in New York. And then she moved out to the Pacific Northwest. She worked for a number of years as an environmental reporter. And then she left, and I think to become a farmer slash podcaster. And she's become obviously a very well-known podcaster and very strong views about media freedom. I hope the reference to farmer is a correct one. But anyway, I'm very happy to have Alison join us. And perhaps, you could tell us a little bit as to how you came to be on Locals and what your feelings about the media tech world in general.
Well, I started on Locals because I think it was really more so out of necessity because I cover COVID sometimes, and YouTube just doesn't want you to talk about it at all unless you're pushing their predetermined narrative, which really is the government's narrative. So if you ask any questions at all, you let anybody on your channel ask any questions, you're in prime territory for removal. So I wanted to diversify, and Locals was a place that I had some friends on already. And I like it because it feels like kind of a mix of Facebook, YouTube, Patreon. You get kind of the best of all the worlds. You can live stream now, and other people can post, which I really like too, because it's kind of it's a nice way to get story ideas from the community. And then, if you take a day off or something, they can talk amongst themselves. It's not just you. So I like it because it's not like this top-down model, which I think, like YouTube, for instance, is very top-down. Only I broadcast, only I tell people what I'm thinking. And yeah, they're in the comment section, but it's not really the same. And Locals, I think, they can actually post on the page. And so I really do appreciate that, because again, it's also sort of, I feel like, a more intellectually mature audience. And not to say that, people on YouTube don't know what they're talking about. There are some very smart people in my comment section on YouTube. There are also some people who are just like hell bent to just destroy, any sense of mental health that you may have. They just love to show up in the comment section and go after everything but the actual talking points that you're discussing. And so it's just, it's just one of those places where it's like you gotta do 15 minutes of meditation before and after, to just keep your sanity when you're on YouTube. So I like Locals because I don't feel like I need like antipsychotics after dealing with the community on Locals. So that's why I went there. As far as like the media, I would say, big picture, what I discuss nowadays is how decisions are made editorially, what kind of time and resources the average mainstream journalist has to even understand what they're talking about. And I really started doing that because I was seeing how the mainstream news was having a real effect on not just policy and people's decision making, but their actual relationships. People saying, I'm not going to talk to my grandma anymore. You're such an idiot if you voted for this person or that person. And I wanted people to understand how little many people in my old industry know about what they're really talking about. So hey, you can watch them and listen to them if you want to, but take it with a grain of salt. You may be able to do more research than they can with your day than an average reporter, because even the most well-meaning reporters, which I would put myself in the category of somebody who showed up every day trying to do the best that she could, I really didn't have the time to do the work that I needed to do. And as I became more educated on the topics I was covering, and I was an environmental specialist at the end, the more I learned about what I was covering, the more I realized how little I actually knew. And I was very naive at the beginning because I didn't know very much. And so then, the more I learned, I'm like, wait a second, I didn't have time to read that. Research paper. I didn't have time to read that Senate report. I don't really know what I'm talking about. And so then when, I tried to go to my bosses to reform that and change my position to something that would be, more amenable to understanding, and also to go back to the farming thing, to live in a place that I didn't want to be attached to a city anymore. I wanted to live in the countryside. They just thought I was crazy. So I left. But I share my story a lot because I really want people to understand that, if you're making life or death decisions, you're making decisions about never talking to one of your loved ones again. If you're getting divorced based on what you watch on mainstream news, these are not good decisions to be making based on what the corporate media is telling you, because they really don't know what you may think they know.
Right.
Extraordinary. I mean, that's one of the things that I think that's one of the advantages that George and I have, is that we talk about things that we've lived through. Okay. Mm-hmm. We're kind of lucky that way. And in our educational background as well. And that's why we actually devote ourselves to media coverage, because you're absolutely 100% right. Most of the people in media talking about world events don't really know much about them. They don't know the antecedents. They don't understand how to conceptualize it, where things come from, what the connections are. And it's usually just to score political points. So, I mean, George and I it's hilarious. We can watch Hannity, for example, and just shoot holes through everything that he's saying. He's well-intended. I believe that. Okay. I'm sure he's a nice guy. But I mean, he doesn't have much depth. Okay, and what he's doing, he's making he has an emotional message without much substance to it, and that is very, very frustrating for us. I mean, as a conservative too, and I really get sick and tired of conservatives constructing an argument that is so facile and so weak, but it's just for an emotional reaction. And that's really a bad place to be. Just for, like you said, it can divide people very, very easily over really no substance whatsoever.
Right. I've talked about that exact point, the emotional side of things, and are reacting emotionally and losing just the interest, not just the ability, but just the interest in having good faith, intellectually honest, rational conversations with each other. And, and I don't know if I could, totally put all the blame on mainstream news, but I do think it's interesting because I'll introduce that idea sometimes, when I do to my YouTube audience. And I think sometimes people get mad when you're not mad enough. I've noticed that. So even in the effort to try to say, hey, there's a different way to think through this. And maybe, I remember talking about what happened on January 6th at the Capitol. And I'm like, on one hand, this is such a reflection of the distrust people have of our institutions at this point. And I showed a video of people kicking these big corporate news cameras. They're just kicking them and they're throwing water on stuff, and they're just, pissed at the mainstream news. And I'm like, on one hand, you can both say, hey, I get it. I understand what we've done to get people to the point that they have just lost all trust, and that they feel this way. On the other hand, I don't believe this is the way to win. I don't believe that just going out and kicking people's cameras and breaking stuff and saying F you and pushing people. I don't think that helps you see the truth any more than the other way. I think you are still going to be blinded by hate, rage, whatever else it is. You'll just end up in the opposite extreme side of the spectrum.
In reinforcing the message that you don't want. Okay. That's exactly right. Because another set of eyes could say, see, that's exactly what these people are like. Okay. It reinforces exactly the opposite that you want to.
And that is how the media sees that. That is how a lot of these journalists see it. Because they're people too, you know what I mean? And I'm not trying to make excuses, but they're just as co-opted by groupthink and brainwashing and their own propaganda. And so, so they're looking at it in a lot of, well, God, these people, look at them. They're nuts. They're like animals. And you give them fuel for their fire, and give them an opportunity to, point fingers at behavior and not facts. And if you want to talk facts about how crappy they are at doing their job, you're giving them every opportunity to turn away from that and just point at your, kicking their camera and just say that how do you deal with these people? They're animals. And then they never have to deal with the actual talking points.
Right. But I think that, by saying, well, they're animals, I mean, that's, it's just taking a small group and saying that they are representative of the whole. But when you think of, let's say they go to a Trump rally and Trump says something like fake news, there they are, look, they're going to, he has this usual shtick, that they're going to turn the camera off just so as not to show the big crowd here. And so when those people say to them, that point to them and say, oh, this is fake news, there's a reason for it, because they don't think the media do an honest job. And I think that they have a point. I mean, I don't think the media do an honest job. I don't think from the moment Trump started his campaign, the media made any attempt to cover him in a way that the media should. I mean, there's plenty of negative things to say about him. But I think that, this constant drumbeat, liar, 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 it's just no good. And that's all that happens is the people who support him say, well, why should I bother with these people? Why should I bother?
Well, what happened there, I think it's very, very interesting point, George, because what happened there is that from going down the escalator, there was a huge pivot, and most people aren't aware of it. What happened is that there was biased media coverage of Trump. Okay, we always accepted that from the beginning. Okay, but what happened was the story was not Trump; it was the media itself, and that's what we got during the entire administration of what other media thinks. And they reported on each other, which of course reinforced this groupthink that got so hermetically closed. And I think that's that. And then you have people that are outside of that or already had a prejudice against the mainstream media. That was solidified as well. The problem is the media talks too much about itself. And I think that distorts what people's understand. I mean, remember when Anderson Cooper said they were at the Holiday Inn eating cheese sandwiches or something. I mean, a Vanderbilt. Okay, he shows himself. And they all show themselves all the time. Right. And obviously, people are going to have a very negative reaction to that because their message is that you're less than what you should be, and the media did that.
Well, I think so, and I there's one thing people don't like. It's when somebody looks down upon them. So, these people who showed up in Washington on January the 6th, I mean, they're often poor people, or at least people who are just barely getting by. And the moment they feel that they're being looked down on, treated with disdain, treated as less than human, they get very resentful. I mean, if you want to really get people mad, treat them with contempt, treat them as if they're, they're less than human. And boy, will they get mad. And I think that the media walked into that mindset of treating people in that way.
I mean, I agree with everything you guys are saying. And I can understand, again, to go back to what I can understand why people feel that way. I just don't think that long-term, it's the effective strategy. And I think, the same people who would be the first to point out like Antifa going and breaking people's stuff, because I covered them, people who consider themselves Antifa aligned activists, and they did the same thing. And I just don't think long term, I happen to be from a value standpoint, I as a reporter, it would be a failure on my part trying to understand people if I went to them in rage. I like that. So it's like, if your goal is to truly understand what is going on and to try to change things, I think like my starting point is to not go down their road. If you believe that what they do is divide through emotional triggers, division, anger, fear, all that stuff, then the worst thing, in my opinion, to do would be to become just like what you hate, you know?
Yeah. Do you think that they are attempting to change anything, or are they just simply expressing their anger and frustration? Because I don't think that they
No, they're not. I don't think.
They're just angry.
Yeah, they're just angry. Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't think they're trying to change anything. I just, you know, they'll say like, I want mainstream news to stop lying. I want all these things. But yeah, if you want that, I don't think, you know, you do nothing to actually change what's going on there by just breaking someone's camera. They're going to get a new camera, and then they're also going to probably take that experience and add it to, whether they're doing it self-aware or not, add it to their file folder of who they think your people are, you know, and then that affects the coverage, and they'll double down, which then I guess just starts this ping pong thing. So then they'll get even angrier, and, you know, I don't know where it ends, but I will say that's one thing that kind of differentiates me as somebody, you know, speaking about this, because I will get a lot, like, Alison's a media hack for trying to help people understand how fake news becomes fake news, like what it is exactly that, and because a lot of people have this presupposition that, you know, you go into an editorial meeting and you have all these sinister, very self-aware people that are trying to take over the world. They're not smart enough in a lot of cases to be that person that you're talking about. You know, they don't know, they're not, it would be almost easier to deal with a bunch of self-aware, sinister, evil dictators than it would be to deal with a bunch of, you know, people who just have literally no clue what they're talking about, you know, and are just like working out of kind of an 8th grade mentality.
I don't think it's quite that they don't know what they're talking about. I think they do know what they're talking about. They just have a mindset. That's what they think. Now, Peter, when you were talking with Chris Cuomo, all right, Chris Cuomo is not he's not the brightest bulb in the world, but the point is that he had a certain mindset. I mean, you know, he just couldn't see anything beyond.
Every question was a loaded
CNN mindset.
Every question was a loaded question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every single one of them. Okay, and when I threw back questions to him, he just deflected and asked me basically, how often do you beat your wife? I mean, every single time. Because he already, see, this is what irritates me, is that a lot of this reporting, if it's from the newsroom all the way down to a reporter, they've already have their preconceived idea what the story is, and they're just filling it in for things that make sense, okay? Which is, you know, that's why George and I do 2 or 3 videos a day. I mean, it's exhausting for us, so many topics. We have to go and fill in the background, showing these people have no idea what they're talking about.
Right. Yeah, and that's a game. I mean, this was at a time, this was 2014. This is soon after the Maidan, the overthrow of the government in Kiev, and then this was the shooting down of the airliner, the Dutch airliner, or the Malaysian airliner. That's what you were talking about. I mean, they had the story. The story was Russians are evil. Everything was caused by Putin. Russians are already behind the shooting down of the plane, and really nothing was going to break through. I mean, that was it. I mean, it's like there's no real way to break through that CNN mentality. And I think that he was asking you this when did you stop beating your wife question, because he just saw you as a spokesman for the Russian government. I mean, and that's it. So
I'm not.
Yeah, of course you're not. But that's what he saw. So it's very hard to break that mentality, because it's
you know what the outcome of that is. You know what the outcome of that kind of coverage is that it gave a pass to whoever did it, because they already know the culprit. We still don't know the full story right now, because the story is cast and the die is cast, and no one takes any interest. Okay, what almost 300 people that died, their relatives still don't know the whole story. No. And that's a tragedy in itself.
Yeah.
Well, the only thing to really add there is just, you know, I have a master's degree it's a Master of Divinity with a specialization in psychology and counseling. And so I know that informs the way that I look at all this, but I really do think that a lot of this is basic psychological dysfunction on a lot of, I mean, if you're like still, you haven't grown out of that mindset of like mommy and daddy never do anything wrong. And I know that may sound oversimplified, but if you're a human being who hasn't evolved to the point where you're able to see nuance and hear nuance, it's like you're my daughter, she wouldn't understand these things, that we're talking, because she's too young. But you hope that eventually, you don't just say like, that horse is bad, bad horse, and all you do is see that, that you don't see that the horse maybe just wanted to eat some hay and accidentally stepped on your foot. There are all these reasons. So if you don't ever grow out of that, and I think, I had this woman on who runs I think it's the Institute for Critical Thinking. Her name's Dr. Linda Elder. And, I asked her about critical thinking in the news, and she's like, it's no different than it's a sampling of just the average person in the world. Most people are not, at a level where they're using, critical thinking skills on a regular basis. And so the media is the same as maybe some other doctors. There are plenty of doctors out there who are terrible doctors because they just go along with groupthink, whatever they were trained. There are certain things that they, medical programs have not thought differently about, and they've just been using the same.
Why is that though? I mean, as someone that has worked in media, I mean, is it just easier to get along with the group think? I mean, is it just easier to get through the day and get your paycheck and just go along with what's being said? Because if you think about it, I mean, there's like, I don't want to go deep into the weeds about too deep on stories, but there's a huge scandal at the OPCW, the convention that regulates chemical weapons. There is a huge cover up there. And it's really interesting, as Glenn Greenwald pointed out, is that this is a story that can make your career by revealing the cover up. But no, everyone is too afraid or too comfortable. And where is the great journalists of our time? Because Glenn Greenwald has broken 10 major stories. Okay?
But Glenn Greenwald's never worked for one of the like mainstream corporate outlets.
Maybe that's why he's so good.
That's why he's good.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, because the system in those outlets is set up for people who are fine regurgitating very oversimplified talking points and don't have time to do investigations. I mean, once you start to wake up and you.
Well, I don't think it's quite that they don't have time, but they just don't have the inclination. Suppose you're in a newsroom.
No, they don't. They literally, I can tell you 100%. My number one main issue in my job, and granted, I worked in television, which may be a little bit different than print, but I had 3 hours a day, and I shot and edited all of my own stuff. There was no time. I had no time to read anything. There's no way I could take on a project like what you're discussing here, because I just literally would not have had time to do the investigating. And investigative journalists are being laid off left and right. So like, we were one of the few stations in the country that had a couple investigative journalists that were given a month to work on a story. That is incredulous for most newsrooms. They don't, you literally, like, you may get out of your morning meeting at 10:30 in the morning, and you got to be done with the shooting and editing, all that. You have to be done by, the story has to be done by 4:30. Okay. So in those 6 hours, you got to drive there. You have to shoot it. You have to write it, voice it, edit it. You have to drive back. You're doing all this. And in 2008, many crews made the decision that they were going to expand like live newscasts to, reduce cost of having to pay for syndication. So now, instead of having 3 newscasts a day, you have 8, which means you have to have people doing 2 and 3 stories a day, but you also can't hire more people, right? Because the whole point is saving money. So what you end up doing is you split the crews. So the photographers have to learn how to write, the reporters learn how to shoot. Now reporters doing 2 to 3 jobs, plus they have to do a live shot. My average day was so stressful that, like, what I started doing by the end was like, so I would do no harm, was I'd pitch stories that were way below what I would have liked to have done from an intellectual level, but at least I knew I wasn't going to say something wrong. And then, so then I get to the point where I'm like, but this isn't interesting anymore. I'm just doing stories about, like, I'll never forget, one of my last stories was a restaurant was switching from plastic water bottles to boxed water, and they wanted me to do a live shot. I'm like, this is a 1-sentence story. This isn't a live shot, 2-minute pat. And that's the other problem. They won't let you go over 90 seconds. My last boss, if you went 1 minute and 33 seconds, they would make you go back and chop out the last 3 seconds. It wouldn't matter if the cure for cancer was in the last 3 seconds. You had to take it out. So, I mean, there's no way that in that framework, you can do the kind of reporting that you're talking about. There's just no way. And so you eventually, once you wake up and you realize, oh, wait a second, I can't do, then you leave, because there's just no way to maintain that. You either try to, what I did was like go to my bosses and say, hey, I want to do it this way. And then they say you're crazy, or they give you that, the option to change it. There are some newsrooms that may be considering that kind of stuff, but for the most part, the system is set up in a way that causes journalism to fail. And one last quick thing, when because of that kind of system, and because of just the cog factory, kind of just grind out the material way infrastructure. The other thing that happens is that, on the opposite end of the output every day, you have people who are thinking literally, because they've just spent their entire day they're just trying to get the thing done, right? I mean, there's no time. You're somebody who wants to understand, wants to be a critical thinker, whatever. Did you have any time? Was there any time in that in your day to even take a second and say, well, wait a second, that thing that guy said was a little off. There was a little off. And then, and so you have a guy say, you guys bring me some material. Okay. And you're like, hey, the government source that you felt like you were a little, it just wasn't making a whole lot of sense. And you're the whistleblower. The problem is I don't know if it's a liability thing, or it's just an ingrained safety zone. But a lot of reporters, a lot of newsrooms take these bureaucratic sources at face value. Whereas if you came to me and said, I'm blowing the whistle on this. This is like you were talking about. This is something that, you could make your career on. I'm going to tell you about what's really going on behind the scenes. What the level of scrutiny we put on the outside voice is so high that if you're in a system where you don't have time to do that scrutiny, you don't have time, all you end up doing is repeating these bureaucratic sources, the Department of Health, the White House, the DOJ, because they just send you a press release. It fills your 5 minutes or 10 minutes that you're looking for. But if you're the whistleblower, we're like, well, we have to confirm that. We have to confirm that with secondary, tertiary sources. We have to do this legwork, the investigating that we're talking about. And you never have time to do that. Guess who never makes it on TV? The whistleblower, the outside source, because like I said, the system is set up so that you're regurgitating bureaucratic talking points, and you're holding the outsider, the investigation, all that stuff. It's just such a high level of scrutiny that if you're not given the time to do that scrutiny, that's just never going to make it on the news. So it's a system set up for failure.
So it's access journalism. That's the model.
It is totally access journalism. Yeah. And every newsroom, I can't tell you how many times I had a story idea that was something the public was very interested in and was a really important issue-oriented topic. And my boss was really, well, how are we going to get that done by 4? And you're like, well, I don't think I can. Could I do it tomorrow? Well, what are we supposed to do today at 4? And you're the one, one time I was sent on a story. This was back when I was in Knoxville. So this was years ago, 2008, 2009. And my story fell through at noon or 12:31 p.m. Okay. Which is you're like, oh God, it's just enough time for them to make you start over. You wish your story would fall through at 3:30 or 4 so that it's there's something I can do. But at 12:30, it's no, you better find. And I'm an hour away from the station. I call my boss and I this person's not going to do the interview anymore. Well, you better find a story and it better be for the lead, So I had to find not only something to fill but a lead story. So what did I do? I literally took the next exit. I just started banging on doors, businesses. I'm Alison Morrow. I work for WBIR Channel 10. I need a lead story. Do you have a lead story for me? And finally I got to my 5th office, and it was some kind of, judicial probation program for teens. They're changing the way that the court's going to work. And these kids are going to have this new, I don't even remember, it's so long ago, but I'm like, great. Will you do the interview? Where's the judge is available at 3. Fine. So I just put it together, but I have in that particular case, did I have time to is this a good program? What are the real details of this program? I was just this program's happening. It's awesome. You know, I don't care. It filled my 4:00 story or my lead at 5:00, whenever it was. And that is how a lot of the news is put together, at least on a local level. If it's a national story at a local level, they're just repeating. There's like three or four affiliates that are just pushing it. And it's the same talking points that then they just go around the country. And if it's the national news, they're working. I have friends that went from local to national. They're the same people and they're working overnight shifts and they're just taking like AP Wire or Reuters Wire stories and it's just repeating the same talking points. So it's a factory farm of information. It's set up for very little diversion from the safety zone. And I do think in a lot of cases, to go to your point of like groupthink and stuff, I do think for these people, a lot of times it's safer. It's just safer to repeat something that may be wrong, but everybody's saying it, versus to take a chance and take a risk on something that could be wrong, but that could be right, but nobody's saying it. And you're going to be the person going against the grain. I mean, think about that, just generally speaking, like, social collusion.
I know how that works because I have guests on my crosstalk program at RT, and because I'm an American, I sound familiar to them. I know there's the stories that we're going to be talking about. And there's one Democrat strategist that comes on. I'm not going to name his name. He's actually a nice guy, but I watch him on CNN and MSNBC, and he gets into his role, and then I say, "Oh, sorry, that's a factual mistake. That's actually not true," and he's just stunned. He's just absolutely stunned. I said, "No, that's factually not correct." And then I correct him, and they get all flustered because it was like everything was really well rehearsed. It worked on CNN really well, and I just keep, no, that's just simply not true. And these people get really flustered. They get really kind of angry too because they're being fact checked in real time.
I think you have to be interested in learning to be a good journalist and not have a team that you want to win really at the end of the day. And I just don't think, that is encouraged in a lot of newsrooms. I think nowadays, and granted, I don't know what it was like 100 years ago, maybe it was worse, but I don't think that.
Can I interrupt you for a second? Because you just said something that's really interesting, is that wanting your team to win. Is that something that is consciously you're aware of in newsrooms, your team?
I do think in some cases, yeah. I had a manager who, he had very strong opinions about a couple topics, and he felt morally obligated to silence the critics on those topics. And he felt like he was doing that for the betterment of the public. So yeah, in some cases, yeah, they do absolutely know they've drawn the line, but they're not sitting there thinking, I know that I'm a liar, I'm not giving people information. They think the liars are on the other side, and that the best thing they can do is be the gatekeeper for the public and not share the information.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of that. I worked at a legal newspaper, and the reporters always went to whichever the story they wanted to go. If, let's say, they wanted to say that this is a great defendant, they just went to talk to the defense lawyers. They didn't bother to examine the case or anything, so they just simply regurgitated the talking points of the defense attorneys, and that was the report. If, on the other hand, they wanted to do a pro-prosecution story, they just went to the government attorneys and simply wrote down everything the government attorney said. There was never really any attempt to try to really analyze, basically get to the bottom of a case. It's just, which side were they on? Boom, and that's the one that they went with.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about your YouTube channel. How long has that been going, and what are you trying to do there?
Well, I mean, I don't know how much longer I'll be alive on YouTube, but I started it when I left corporate news. I started it before I left corporate news, but started to do more of it. I was just doing I was an environmental reporter, so I would talk about clean living stuff, the detergents you use and the stuff that goes down the drain into the ocean and things like that. And my husband and I bought an Airstream that we're renovating so we can live in that and then build a homestead and all that stuff. And so I would document our Airstream renovations, but we got to winter and we couldn't do Airstream renovation anymore because of the snow. So I COVID hit and I was starting to get kind of concerned about policies that were enacted based on, public support for things that they learned about in my old, from my old industry, which knows very little about, this particular topic other than what these government talking points. And so that's when I started kind of switching to media analysis. Hey, this is what, like I just told you that story about my, what that day was like, right? I mean, would you trust a person who literally just made something out of thin air at 3:00 in the afternoon to tell you what kind of medical decisions you should make, whether you should ever talk to your grandma again, who you should vote for? I mean, would you trust that person? Because I wouldn't trust myself with that kind. I would be like, I don't know what I'm talking about. And if they were more honest with the public, they would say that, and they'll tell you that, behind the scenes, reporters will all talk about this stuff, right? But then they get mad when the public's like, fake news. You're like, no, it is fake news. Like, we don't, we don't really know a lot of times what we're talking, especially if it's somebody shot someone or something down the street. Okay, it's a local crime issue, whatever. But if it's an issue-oriented thing or it's not a local thing, come on, it's people are just taking word for it. Like, you guys have historical knowledge, like you said, you lived through it. A lot of these are the vast majority. They no historical knowledge, haven't lived through this stuff. Older reporters have all quit because of the BS that I've told you about. And so you have 22-year-olds that are telling you about something that happened 50 years ago. They don't know what, come on, and they've all been indoctrinated in college. It's a mess. So I started talking about this stuff, and and then that got me into like interviewing people. So I started focusing on censorship because one of my biggest beefs is with corporate news, like pushing speech suppression, yeah, get rid of them. Now that we got Trump, let's get everybody else off. And I really just find that disgusting and antithetical to what a journalist should be saying. So I focused on that, which has then brought me to interview people who are being censored. Well, then now, the AI connects you with that doctor they kicked off or whatever. So now, I've had I had 2 strikes and got suspended, but then mysteriously after public backlash, without any communication, my strike was removed and I was allowed back into my channel. So, I have no idea really how YouTube is making its decisions. My guess is that it's heavily AI. I don't think there are very many people that are doing reviews. It's funny, I haven't checked yet, but like I did a video on Julian Assange's case like 5 days ago. It's been waiting for review for monetization it was at least yesterday. So it would have been literally 5 days, waiting for to review. So somehow they can't get to my Assange video to decide whether it should be monetized, but in 12 hours, they decided I should be locked out of my channel. So how is that, it doesn't make any sense. And so, long story short, I'm going to keep pushing on YouTube because I believe that it's a bridge to the outside world, and so there are people like me, for instance, who all I knew was YouTube a few years ago. And there were people that I listened to that got me out, what about all these other places? Because these people have been booted. I just didn't know any of that stuff. And so the reason I even keep any presence at all on YouTube is simply because there are people like me who aren't totally awake yet and are looking for information and they need a bridge. And otherwise I would be done with YouTube altogether. Cause
we're doing a similar thing. We're doing a similar thing because we use YouTube to promote locals.
Mm-hmm. Right. And we,
that's kind of how I am too. I'm on a couple other platforms, but same idea.
Yeah, we were demonetized suddenly, really, without any real notice, without any explanation. And for months and months and months and months, we were demonetized. And then suddenly we were told, you're remonetized. No,
yeah.
Why they made that decision. But again, next week we might be demonetized again. So I don't know how they make those kind of decisions.
It's definitely not a place where you can rely on to have a business, really, if you want to do this full time, and you want to have regular access to your audience, you cannot rely on it. It's only there. Like I call it like window shopping. People can window shop my store on YouTube, but I don't want them like coming in and buying there. I want to take them somewhere else. Cause it's like having a landlord with, some kind of psychotic issue where you show up to your retail space and they've locked you out and thrown all your furniture outside for no reason. And, you can't carry on consistently in a place like that. So yeah. And they've made it very clear that they're not really interested in small channels anymore. Susan Wojcicki has said she was on this video with the World Economic Forum talking about how they see themselves as the next generation platform for media companies, specifically said that for media companies to reach their audiences. They're not, and then she's disparaging the guy in the basement or whatever, which is, it's sad because the guy in the basement is literally what made YouTube what it is, right? It's what made people go to YouTube. Like, I want to hear what Tommy and the cat have to say or whatever else. And they built it off the back of the idea that you were independent. It was YouTube, and now it's totally their tube. And it's really actually becoming a very dangerous place. I personally think for people who like assume that they're doing, they're blocking people because of they're protecting the public. Like, to me, giving the public the idea that if people are being removed, their speech is being removed because it's just misinformation, it's dangerous for you. That to me is the danger, is really dangerous. Because then, you're creating this false sense of security that like, all these videos that are YouTube approved, or when YouTube sends Dr. Fauci around to do all these interviews with the big creators, they give this illusion that like, this is the authoritative stuff. This is the safe stuff. And anyone who's asking any questions, which is literally what science is, it's literally what journalism is. And those people are getting booted off. It's reframing what science is for people. It's reframing what journalism is to a place of like 1940s censorship. And that to me is like, that's the real danger, not the speech that they're disallowing, that they say is, leading people down the wrong path.
They should rename it Nanny Tube.
Yeah, I totally agree. They're like, yeah, they are. And you know what? I've heard big name, TV people like Soledad O'Brien, Lester Holt say like, we got to get, misinformation off and stop booking liars and, extremism and, using all these sort of trigger words. Well, I guess in theory, the idea of removing misinformation, maybe somebody could argue like the idea of having only truth out there is a great one. The problem is though, like, the people who are determining what is true, like they don't have the qualifications to make these decisions. They do not know what they're talking about. And that's why it concerns me, like in the media, like I had that boss I told you about who thought his greatest gift to the public was to silence the dissidents of his, particular cause that he felt like were leading the people astray. He's not qualified to decide that those people don't know what they're talking about. He doesn't have the training. He hasn't read enough to make that decision. And so you have these people who literally like they're even somebody at the top level of the government. How often has the government been wrong? And I thought science was a process of learning anyway. It was an exploratory process where you did change your mind, where, how can you do that in an environment that has these fossilized community guidelines that say, I just heard somebody say the other day, trust science is totally antithetical to science because science is not about trust. Science is about exploring, debating, showing the research. There's no such thing as trusting science, like in the sense that like just trust Fauci, like what he says right now. Science is a process of the opposite of like blind trust. It is exactly the opposite of what YouTube says it should be on its channel. They're the anti-science people, not the ones who are asking the questions.
No, that's right.
And you guys, I gotta go. I'm really sorry. My trainer's here, my horse trainer.
Your horse trainer? No, that's
Horse trainer.
I'm sorry.
So
I'm happy to come back on anytime.
You mean like a horse trainer, like a riding, you're training to?
Yeah, we got this new horse, and she's a little bit of a miscreant. So,
okay, Alison, would you like to be a guest on Crosstalk?
Yeah, I would love to anytime.
Okay, I'll get your contacts, and then I'd love to have you on. Okay.
Okay, awesome. Thank you guys for the invitation.
Thank you. It was great fun. Thank you.
Okay, see you next time.
Bye bye.